these psychedelic experiences with breath work,
Hmm.
visuals, out of body experiences. Like, can you expand on that? Like, how common is that? And like, is that what we're doing? We're accessing the quantum field through those psychedelic breathwork experiences?
Yeah, I think the first step to it in actually allowing it to happen is believing that it can. You know, you have to have the mindset and the belief system that it can happen for you. Otherwise, you know, you're not going to be as open to it, allowing and receiving it as you normally would. But those type of body experiences typically happen a lot with breath work, is because you go from that brain, the beta wave state, the conscious state, and you can drop yourself down into these subconscious states. And the subconscious state is where now you're able to, you know, be more connected with your inner awareness, right? Your inner self, your, you know, divine intuition, right? And there's different types of breathwork practices. One of them is a breathwork practice Joe Dispenza developed, where basically you're using like the internal pressure of your diaphragm to putting mechanical pressure on your spine, which it pushes the cerebral spinal fluid up your spine and puts mechanical pressure on your pituitary gland.
Wow.
And what that does is actually activate these crystals that are in your pituitary gland, which actually release the combination of melatonin, serotonin, which then can, if you convert melatonin, I think it's like a precursor to dimethyltryptamine. And so that's where you can
Wow.
have these out of body experiences, is through different types of breath work.
Is that
So
like
it's very
kundalini
common.
energy? Is that like the scientific
Yeah.
explanation? All right, we are here with Danny Kinnas and Chris Landeros of ARRAKIS Labs. Very, very excited. We've been trying to put this together for a little bit. Danny was feeling a little under the weather because both Danny and Chris are jet setting all over the world right now. We got Chris in Costa Rica, and where are you right now, Danny?
I'm actually in my home in Huntington Beach,
Okay, right on.
California.
Yeah.
So you two know each other, and what's the connection there? You guys are friends in Huntington.
Yes. Okay. So I'm excited that you started with that. And it's really nice to know because for those who are watching, hopefully you'll want to watch more of these. Um, Neil and I both get to meet amazing people, and as we're building this
True.
Arrakis tribe, we're bringing in our tribes together. So I always knew and saw Danny. I work at Equinox, he goes to Equinox. That is such an underlying factor, but shout out to Equinox. I love you. You bring amazing people into my life. This is what happened, and we won't go super into it. Danny, you mentioned it on another podcast, so I think you'll be okay with me saying that at one point someone you were dating was a very powerful yogi, and she did this event, and I'm sure you know where it was, but it was somewhere in LA on this mountaintop, like this beautiful location. And I have a tendency of just saying yes. If I dig somebody's energy, if I like them, I'm like, yes. Fire dumpster party at 1 a.m., I'll bring the marshmallows. Yes, like I won't ask questions. So I went to this thing not having any idea that Danny was actually going to be a part of it, really having no information about Danny other than he lights up a room when he walks into it. And everybody gravitates towards him. So I'm thinking it's a yoga thing. I'm going to support his girlfriend. Honored that she even asked me to go attend. And he does a very mini session of holotropic breath work at the beginning. And when I say mini, I mean mini. And I went from just being on this plane to like astroplane, like high as a kite in a way of clarity. Not high where you're foggy and you don't know where you are. It was just like I felt like my eyes were clearer than ever. My heart was racing, yet I was rooted. And that's how I got to know a deeper essence of Danny. And when Neil and I started working on this project, he was number one on my list. And I sent him his profile. I was like, look at him. He's everything. He's spiritual. He's world traveled. He wants to do the work. He's genuine. He's sincere. And one of the many things that I hope that we cover today is, and Danny, we talked about this when we met, I think about 2 weeks ago, that the external visual of who you are, which I get it, you know, like we live in Huntington Beach, we travel. And I hope you share a little bit of like your roots and where you came from. But what I really
Hmm.
want people to know, because I get this asked a lot too, is, oh, how are you so happy? Or how are you this? And it's because you do the work and you've
Hmm.
done extensive amount of work. And once you start doing the work, and I know for those of you who might be following me separately, I say the work a lot, and that's exactly what it is. But as you do the work, you just want it more because it pours back into you. You receive and you give, and you give and you receive. So I'm just really excited for our tribe to hear about where you came from, your journey, what you've done, how you want to impact and change the world. And really, really at the root of all of this, your dharma, your passion and your purpose and how it serves the people. So I love you. Let's go.
Amazing.
Oh,
Right
thank you
on.
so much, Chris. Those are very kind words.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
Danny,
go ahead, Neil.
Danny, tell us a little bit about, just your background. We definitely want to
Sure.
get into some of your expertise with breath work. Before the show, you mentioned some of your influences, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Ram Dass, Eckhart Tolle. Those are all really, really powerful people and influences in my life, especially. It was kind of crazy because Eckhart Tolle was kind of like a big turning point for me, like a
Mm.
couple decades ago, just learning how to be present. But before we get too into that, like you're not from Huntington Beach, right? Like how did you get to Huntington Beach, and then how did you find this like path of like expanding, your consciousness, raising your vibration?
Sure. No, I appreciate you guys. Number one, thank you guys for having me on. Like super grateful and just appreciative that you thought of me, Chris, initially. Like you said, I think we just have a lot of things in alignment. So it just makes a lot of sense for us to do this. I'm very excited for the event that we have coming up too, which hopefully we can touch on for anyone that's like in the local OC LA area. But my real journey started when I grew up in Michigan. I spent the majority of my life there, went to school there. I think it really started with my choice in school and education. I started out wanting to go into exercise physiology, went to school for that. And post graduation, got into a lot of personal training. And I was also exposed in college to a lot of personal development through being involved in network marketing. And as much as like network marketing has like this negative connotation around it, a lot of times like pyramid schemes and everything else, I think it was such a pivotal point in my life where instead of going out and typically doing the partying thing that a lot of college, students did, I was starting to surround myself around a lot of entrepreneurial and really high level minded, intelligent, human beings at, in my early 20s. So I spent a lot of time instead of going out and partying, reading, doing personal development, and being, really focusing on doing more than what the average college kid would do. So it kind of really put me into an entrepreneurial mindset. And once you kind of get exposed to those personal development tools, and books and audios and things like that, it kind of sets you down a different path and a different journey. And that was kind of, like I said, the biggest and most pivotal point for me, being exposed to, a lot of, higher level intelligent human beings that are making money, doing things at a very young age. So eventually, I actually visited California to visit some of my family. And when I was out here, I was like, the energy here, everything was like so next level comparatively to, if you guys are familiar with the Midwest, it can be very mundane, average in ways. So, there's just an abundance out in California, right? Obviously, there's a lot of polarity to the abundance, but at the end of the day, me coming from the Midwest, it just seemed very attractive and it seemed like where I wanted to, be to where I really belonged. And so I took all my things after probably around 23, I think it was 25 actually, moved to California on my own, had a few friends that came with me shortly after, and really got into, doing my personal training. I got a job out at a local 24, actually interviewed at the Huntington Beach Equinox as well too. But during that period of time, I was exposed to one of my friends who uh, her boyfriend actually ran a few gyms out of the Orange County area. And she said, hey, I have this opportunity for you. This opportunity is not personal training, but you would be working with gym owners and it would be a sales type of situation. And I said, okay. And then she talked about it being like 5 figures. And at the mid early 20s, I was like, sure, let's go for it. Sounds fantastic. So jumped on this, train where basically I was teaching brick and mortar fitness facilities how to market, run, sell their business, kind of like A to Z. And during that process, a lot of the clientele that I was working with were like type A personality males. So a lot of that was working through, type A personality males and their limiting beliefs, right? They have a lot of limiting beliefs behind what's possible, what they could do financially, personally, things like that. And I developed a really good knack to connecting with males, especially type A personality males that really have a lot of barriers and boundaries, and a lot of, you know, um, veils up, that they prevent themselves from being vulnerable and open and being honest, right? They think they have to be this macho individual a lot of the time. So for me, I felt like this really good connection, and knack for and skill set for, working with these type of people. And during around this exact same time, I became really interested in yoga. I started taking yoga classes at the Equinox that Chris and I both still attend and she works at. And that's when I met my had previous girlfriend of years ago, and she introduced me to a lot of yoga. Spent a lot more time in that space, became a lot more exposed to different types of healing modalities. Right, started getting really into meditation. Started hanging out with some other people that were really into the healing arts, and that really led me down a path of wanting to really pursue those things. And at some point, working with the last company I helped grow, which I was a part of with this gym consulting business, I wasn't getting really equity within this company, so I decided to transition out. And right as I decided to transition out is right when COVID hit, and it made the perfect amount of sense for me to start and open up my own coaching business. And during that period of time, I really started diving into different modalities like breathwork, Reiki, neurolinguistic programming, which is typically known as NLP, different types of guided meditation. Because for me as an individual, I, grew up with a lot of just anxiety, typical anxiety, in all different shapes and forms, right? And I wanted to find, what worked for me. And I felt like, focusing on just one aspect, which would be maybe just breath work, right? Wouldn't be enough, and I like to think that, everyone has a different path and to healing and awareness, consciousness. And I wanted to be, very equipped, right, with every tool and every facet and every modality possible to help people at the highest level. So started out with, a lot of different breathwork practices, started out with, getting certified in Reiki healing, neurolinguistic programming, all these different things to develop kind of like this tool set of different modalities to help out clients and people in need. And from there, my business really blossomed over the COVID times, right? Which was kind of very difficult, but also the perfect timing, all in the same way. So that's kind of like how my start began. And from then, I started creating my own series on Instagram, which is called Daily Downloads, and creating videos around awareness, consciousness, mindset, healing, things like that, things that I felt called, to speak on that helped me in my life, and hoped that, I could be able to share outwardly with others.
Amazing. Was it breathwork that kind of like came in first, or was that like breathwork yoga kind of like came in at like around the same time? For me,
Um,
breath work really changed everything. It taught me meditation.
mhm.
It like made me more interested in yoga. It made me more interested in just like exploring my consciousness. It's a way for me personally that it's very grounding and centering. So is that
Mhm.
something that like kind of spawned that, or did it all kind of just like happen spontaneously around the same time?
I'll have to give credit to yoga. I mean, through yoga, is a practice of breath, right? And, if you're not using your breath through yoga, you're really not doing yoga. I mean, yoga and laying on your mat and breathing is yoga in itself, right? And I'm sure Chris can attest to this, and so,
Yeah,
for,
it's
go
it's
ahead.
a good way to get people physically in, because a lot of people, the
Right.
draw is the physical. They see it as a physical practice. And when
Hmm.
you have an instructor, a guide that lets you know, oh, honey, that's just the beginning, and
Hmm.
then it just blossoms into so much more. So that's amazing that you started with that. So any yogis out there, and you're just walking and taking a class and leaving after 60 minutes, you have so much more that's
Hmm.
waiting for you in in
Yeah.
that room, on that mat, and outside of that room. So yeah, so
Beautifully said. And I would, like to attest, like I said, yoga to, me becoming more aware of my breath, right? And the more that I was in tune and cohesive with my breath in my physical practice, I felt such a more of a presence and a mind body connection, right, than I've ever felt. And I think that's one of the most important parts of breath work is what it allows you to do is to allow you to be very present with your inner self, right? Your inner consciousness, that inner awareness that you have. I feel like we spend so much time distracted outside of ourselves with so many different things. It causes us to be in this fight or flight mode, right? And
Yep.
no matter what, fight or flight you can think of as like at the highest level, like doing something that's very stressful or fearful, right? But if you look at it as a very basic level, fight or flight is when your awareness is very much outside of yourself. And anytime we're multitasking at a very high level, we're in fight or flight. So typically on a daily basis, our bodies are always in a fight or flight mode, which is very difficult for our internal self to handle, our body itself to handle, because our nervous system's revved up all the time. If you think about if your body was a car and you were redlining, the car on the gas all the time, right?
It's
Your
gonna burn
body's going to
out.
have that. You're going to burn out, right? It's going to have physical consequences later down the line, and that's what happens with people when they're constantly redlining themselves. And their nervous system's constantly redlining itself. You're always in this sympathetic state, and you don't take the time for your body to calm down, go back to homeostasis, and stay into this rest and digest parasympathetic state.
Yeah,
So it's super. Go ahead.
what's really sorry, what's really interesting with like breathing, whether it's you're just doing regular like a breathwork routine or you're incorporating it into yoga, it's when you start to breathe intentionally and your heart rate starts to come down and your consciousness
Mm,
starts to elevate. It's not until then sometimes that I realize just like how redlined I've been all day long. Like,
right.
it all it takes sometimes is just like a minute or a few minutes of like conscious breathing to just kind of be like, holy shit, I was going a mile a minute for like a week straight,
Seriously.
like you just
Hmm.
crash, you sleep, and then you get up and it's just like you're alarmed out of bed, you've got like all this heavy schedule. And if we don't take time each day to kind of just at least bring our RPMs down, you're literally
Hmm.
burning yourself out, in real time. You're going to crash eventually.
Yeah,
It's like
and
I love alliterations, like love them so much. So like the fight, the flight, the freeze, that's the third one. You just stop doing. You stop. Everything becomes overwhelming. And what you're giving to people the
right.
opportunity to flow and to be
Yeah.
free. That's what like the tools that you're giving them. I do want to ask a question
Hmm.
because I kind of
Sure.
know, but for those that are watching, especially Neil, hopefully we got some of like our NFT people and our Discord people. I would love for you to explain what a type A person is. And you said a type A man. There's also type A women, correct? Just,
Right. Sure.
yes?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So this way, like anybody listening, like maybe they would have thought like, oh, am I type A? And they can really know like, oh, he's talking about me. So I just kind of wanted to go back because you mentioned that just to give a little clarity. And do you only work with men?
Okay, yeah. So to answer your first question, yeah, type A personalities typically are around the idea of being a very dominant personality, being an overly confident personality. Typically, want people that like to be in control, to like to be in charge, and that a lot of times their egos can really come into place and kind of take control. And they're very logically driven a lot of the times, and they don't have the good balance of logic and emotion. So a lot of women are like this. I think as this day and age progresses, there's a lot more type A personality women that are stepping outside of their feminine and they're stepping more into the masculine. And
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing on the other side as well too. More men are transitioning to a little bit more of their feminine and exploring that side of things to create that balance, to have a higher level of emotional intelligence. Um, but what was the second part to your question, Chris?
Do you only work with men?
No, so I actually I definitely work with women as well too. In the last year, I would say I've actually started working with a lot more women. Um, Yeah, working with women is, I think, it's great because I think sometimes, it's good to get a perspective from the other side, right, of the coin. And, when you work with someone that's a different gender type than you get a completely different perspective. I think the positive side of working with the same gender is obviously there's a lot more relatability and understanding. But I think on the other side, a lot of problems stem from the dynamics within male and feminine, environments, right, and situations, and like I said, dynamics. So when you have that different type of perspective that can come from the other side, that has the skill set, tools, emotional intelligence to help guide and help bring awareness to maybe some of the things that you're transitioning through or trying to navigate, it can be very beneficial.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that in like one of the podcasts. I didn't want to listen too much because I like to be very curious.
Sure.
I love not knowing things. Like that's my favorite thing. I don't need to know all the things. That's why I want to know all the people. But like you are creating or helping people create this space where they could be both things. Like people have the power to be masculine and feminine. And the more that we dilute those labels, the more that we can become connected. So
Well, think
you have
think
strength
about
in
this
both.
too.
Yeah.
Think about this too. Like a lot of the ascended masters throughout history, really kind of like embodied both characteristics. When you look at like the Christ figure, when you look at Buddha or Krishna,
Hmm.
they kind of embody like very equally like both the masculine and the feminine. It's something that seems as though it starts to happen naturally as our consciousness kind of evolves and we progress as like ascended humans, essentially, like awakened humans. So
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think that, when you have the yin and the yang, right? There's a
yep.
reason why yin and the yang is an actual thing, why there's ebbs and flows, why there's polarity to male and feminine dynamics, right? Is because those things are necessary, right, to having a very functional perspective awareness within life. And if you're too far sighted on one way or the other, you're really missing out, right, on the other beautiful aspects of what it means to have existence, to be present, to have life, right, to have purpose, to have meaning in, what you do on a daily basis. So, and how you treat people and how people see you. And I think it's just like, I think I always encourage anyone, to spend time in therapy just because I don't look at therapy as like a place you go where you have problems. I look at it as a coach. And, if you look at Olympic athletes, you look at the best people in the world that do anything, all of them have mentors, all of them have coaches. So for you to think that you shouldn't have a coach or, only having a coach is necessary when you have a problem is really doing a disservice to yourself because having, a therapist or a mentor, right, is allowing you to have perspective outside of yourself that you typically can't see on your own, right, to help you navigate things, bring awareness, take the things from the unconscious to be conscious, right? If you go into any types of shadow work, right, understanding like the desires, needs, what are things coming from the unconscious, or the subconscious, and what are things are coming from your ego, right? And I think those type of experiences with having therapists is so important in this day and age because as the technology progresses, things become more complex, right? Our lives and thinking and
So
mindsets and
true.
our everything becomes more complex. We're distracted. We're spending more of our time with our attention outwardly than inwardly. And because of that, we don't have that connection within ourselves as much as we typically
What do you
would
think's
if we reversed
happening?
100 years ago.
What do you think's happening to our brain? Like this is one of the really scary
Hmm.
things, like
Yeah.
right okay, like let me preface this with like right now, because of ARRAKIS and like I'm so like technologically connected, one of the things that I've had to start becoming very mindful of is one thing I did was I moved my physical location, right? Like for the past 6 months, I've
Hmm.
been living in the desert and now I'm living in the mountains. So like as soon as I like turn off my devices, I walk outside and all of a sudden it's like there's birds and there's wind and there's just like a state of presence that happens and you start to notice again going back to the RPMs like just like how redlined we are by like being
Hmm.
connected to like all like sometimes it's like you're being like summoned by like 9 different people at the same time. You've got like
Yeah.
WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, like your regular DMs on like all these various social, networks and stuff like that. And like you're trying to do your posts and stuff like that. It's just like what in the hell is going on? Like our brains were not meant to like
No.
essentially like just be plugged into like all of this tech. Like one thing is like, what do you think is happening? Is this like an unhealthy thing that's happening? It makes our lives easier in some ways, right? Because like, you know, we're all over the world all the time. We're still connected to everybody. But like, what is your daily practice of like being able to disconnect from all of this stuff? Do you even have, you know, like a method in which you can just like turn everything off
Mhm.
and, you know, go and essentially, you know, just be with yourself for a little bit?
No, that's an amazing, bring up, because I think one of the most important practices and things that I focus on a daily basis is a morning routine. And a morning routine is super important to me personally. I think it's very important to a lot of people, is because I'm a big believer in that when you wake up in the morning, whatever type of information that you encounter is either programming you, or you're choosing to let it, or you're choosing to program it, right? So you're choosing to program yourself, or you're allowing information outside yourself to program you. So, for me, when I
Right.
wake up, the first like 45 to an hour, I don't look at my phone. I don't look at any notifications. I don't look at it from any outside source. I focus on, how do I feel? How's my heart feel, right? How's my physical body feel? How's my spirit feel, right? And then, I kind of rate those out of like a 1 to 10. I'm like, okay, if I'm at a 7 here, what can I do to get myself closer to a 10, right? And, I really focus on those things. And, a lot of the things that I incorporate within a morning routine are really focused around like your five senses, because I think your five senses are the biggest triggers to put you into a flow state that can put you into like a high vibrational state, a state in, you getting to choose your primary emotions. And I think that's something I learned from Tony Robbins a long time ago, is just, what are your primary emotions? What are the primary feelings that you're trying to feel on a daily basis? And if you just wake up, pick your phone up, scroll through Instagram, check your emails, check your texts, right? You're allowing this information from outside of yourself to choose how you are going to feel. You're reactionatory to this stuff rather than you choosing how you want to feel. And I think when you first get to choose how you want to feel, then you're way more resilient and resistant to, no, that information, even though it's maybe unfortunate, right, or unsettling, right, or comes out of nowhere, is not going to affect you as much. So in the morning, I focus on a morning routine that really focuses on, physical touch, things that obviously make me feel better, whether it's working through my physical body, stretching, right? I use a lot of different incense, obviously, as ways to obviously trigger positive emotions. One of my favorite incense is copal. I experienced great times in Tulum, for a lot of different reasons, and I brought that type of incense back with me, and I always use that in the morning to just put me in the right mindset every single day. Different types of, I drink a cup of coffee every morning. That's the most amount of caffeine that I have, but having a cup of coffee in the morning is beautiful. Go outside. I do a lot of sun gazing right in the morning, early morning, 6:30, 7 a.m. That makes me feel amazing. So I do these type of things on my own. It's my own time, like, an hour of power or 30 minutes to thrive. And, it's these things that really set me up to have a great day. So when you have all this external information that's constantly coming at you, you're able to, say no to some things, right? Or just be more resilient to these other things that do come at you and come out of nowhere.
Do you have any that's beautiful. I love it. My morning routines are very similar.
Hmm.
One of the things that you know, living in Costa Rica really taught me was that morning sun is so powerful. You know, like one of the
Hmm.
things that I love, you know, Chris is down there right now. One of the things I love about Nosara in particular is it seems almost like the ocean and the sun. It's almost like waking up in India and like going to the Ganges in the morning. Like everybody wakes up and makes like a pilgrimage to the ocean, and then usually like at the end of the day, you know, a big part of everybody's day is going and watching the sunset. For
Hmm.
I personally don't know, have a lot of insight into what it is with the early morning sun, but I've been doing a lot of reading recently where they're like, if you're gonna get in the sun, get in the sun in the morning. There's something that's happening
Hmm.
within your body physiologically that like creates like a euphoria. It's doing something with your hormones. Can you expand on that at all with that early
Yeah.
morning sun in particular?
Yeah, for sure. Andrew Huberman is a really good teacher that really gets into the scientific aspects of those things, and he has a lot of great podcasts on specifically on light. what times of the day you should have light, natural light, and when you shouldn't be looking at your phone. So ideally, when you wake up in the morning, it's really good for your circadian rhythms, right? So when you view light early in the morning, it allows your body temperature to go from a lower temperature rate. When you're sleeping and you're in a deep sleep, your body temperature decreases about, like, I think it's around 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And then as you wake up, right, and as you absorb light, your body temperature increases, right? And a lot of different neurochemicals within the brain, the body, start activating metabolism, start activating neural function, allow you to wake up and start feeling better, right? Activating serotonin, because obviously the pituitary gland in your brain is involved in producing two different hormones that are very similar to themselves, which are melatonin and serotonin, right? Melatonin is produced when you start seeing light, light go like sunset, right? And it goes from light to dark, right? Your body temperature drops, your body starts producing naturally melatonin, and the opposite happens when you wake up. Right. When you wake up, you view that light, it increases the serotonin levels, right, to help you feel more awake, more alive, happier. So it's very important, if you can in the morning, to wake up and view natural light. I'm not gonna, for legal purposes, tell you to go stare at the light and stare at the sun, but I personally do in the morning. Don't do it at noon or anytime throughout the middle day. It's gonna hurt your eyes, but it's obviously a lot more gentle on the eyes earlier morning. It is very good for you, and it helps you put you in that good circadian rhythm. And for that reason, it's going to help you sleep better. It's going to help you feel better. It's going to help you feel more in flow and less chaotic on a daily basis.
Does that have something to do? You'd mentioned neuro-linguistic programming, and I had a guest on a couple of weeks ago that started to touch on that. Does that tie into it? And what is that exactly?
Sure. NLP is, neuro-linguistic programming. So NLP is the practice of understanding people's subconscious minds, right? So as we've developed as humans from, the time we're born all the way to the present moment, different events, things that have happened to our life have programmed us, right, to act, feel, react, respond, have different personalities in certain ways. So basically the information that we've been exposed to and the events that we've exposed to over time have created programs or habits within our subconscious minds, right? And as we all know, our subconscious mind is kind of what runs you on a daily basis without you having to do it. We have an internal intelligence, right? That runs our body, right? We have something that tells our heart to beat, right? That tells us to breathe naturally without having us to consciously do it. Something that if we have a cut on our skin, heals itself, right? We're not telling our bodies to do that. There is an intelligence within ourselves that's doing that, right? And it has to do with, the subconscious, right? I like to think that internal divine intelligence, which I almost think is like a sixth sense and intuition, right? The subconscious kind of bridges the gap between that and the conscious, right? So, NLP really what it is understanding like people's triggers, right? Or understanding the information in the past that, the program they've gone through their whole life that's taught them to be and act a certain way. And then through those patterns and through those programs, they're usually developed through, right, certain situations, but they're also very highly influenced based on the five senses, right? So when you can understand people's programming through their senses, through their past experiences, you understand their pattern, right? There's a pattern that's been developed over time that causes them to have addictions, fears, traumas, PTSD, right? Different things like that. And when you can understand these patterns and you can understand the triggers and at a very high sensory level, then you can use those same patterns to reprogram for better behavior. So you can use those exact same, triggers, right, to now take that fear or that trauma, right, or that phobia, and to actually completely flip it to the other side. And it's a very powerful practice.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we had a guest on, Christoph Deck. He was actually like the second podcast that I ever did, and he does a lot of energy healing modalities. That's kind of his main area of expertise right now. He's been diving into, and what he really touched on was that like a lot of these obsessive compulsive disorders that we have, whether it's addiction or fears and phobias and stuff like that, are typically stemming from a trauma. So he used the example that like if you were a child and you got locked in a car at like 3 years old and now you don't like going in elevators, like people can't figure that out, but it really stems all the way back to that trauma. So when you have these different things that, you know, are inhibiting you in your life, what are some of the things that you can do neuro-linguistically to reprogram, you know, so that you can be a more higher functioning human? Do you have any techniques for stuff like that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, within neurolinguistic programming, there's different types of timeline therapy, and but one of the things I actually wanted to circle back around to is breath work, right?
For
And the reason
sure.
I wanted to mention that is because um, it helps to understand like your brain frequencies and understanding your brainwave states and how those affect the conscious and subconscious mind. So when we look at our brain, there's multiple levels of brainwave frequency. The highest, most conscious level is beta. So when we have beta wave frequencies, there's four different levels of beta. That is our conscious active mind. So we're consciously talking, consciously, you know, driving a vehicle, working out, things like that. You're in an awake, very conscious state. And there's three different levels to that. But once we transition down into what we call I believe it's, yeah, the alpha wave state, right? That is a little bit more of a sleepy state. You know, those are the states like after you've woken up, right? And you're kind of a little bit groggy, but you're awake, or you're very tired, you know, before you go to sleep. That is an alpha wave state. So what's happening is your conscious state is starting to slip slowly into a subconscious state, right? And when we move into the next level, which is like a theta wave state, that's when you're almost half awake and half asleep. And this is actually where a lot of hypnosis takes place. And when you go into the delta wave state, that's your complete unconscious, deep like sleep where REM sleep happens, right? And everything else. You're very susceptible to information and other new things, right? And you know, last thing I'll talk on is gamma wave state, which is a very high perceptory brainwave state, which happens in very, very deep, profound experiences, deep meditation. It's almost like a fifth dimensional type of brainwave experience, right? It can be activated by the pineal gland, dimethyltryptamine, things like that. But kind of going back to my point, you know, breath work, what it allows you to do is to change your breathing patterns. And when you're typically in this fight or flight state all the time, you're in this beta wave state all the time. So what breath work allows you to do is consciously change your breath patterns and allows you to, with different breathing techniques, take your beta wave state and start slowly transitioning it into a subconscious, right, alpha theta wave state, right? And really good hypnotists can bring you directly from conscious directly into delta wave. And that's why they can, you know, with triggers, bring people directly into subconscious state. And that's why when people are hypnosis practitioners, they bring people into delta wave states, they can get them to do most ridiculous things ever. Have you seen tricks on stage and things like that? But
Right.
obviously, you're using it for a healing practice, right? You can obviously help people uncover these, you know, like you said, unconscious traumas and patterns from the past that they're not even aware of themselves. So you start to unravel those things when you're in these subconscious, you know, theta wave, alpha wave states. And I think those alpha theta wave states are the best states to kind of bring yourself into, because that's the state that you're allowing yourself to be more susceptible to new information, and you're able to learn and absorb information much better. So they say like in the mornings and the evenings is actually the best time to like study or learn things, because your subconscious mind is activated a little bit more, so it is imprinted a little bit more effectively.
That
It's
makes
it's
sense,
interesting.
especially after you just explained like light. So imagine like watching a sunset
Mm-hmm.
and then reading and then establishing your evening routine. And I'm only breaking this
Right.
down because for anybody who is just stepping into self-awareness and self-improvement, it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And if anybody's
For sure.
listening right now and thinking, "Oh my gosh, there's so much information." First of all, it goes back to how much work Danny has done. Like he didn't just read one book. This is multiple books, multiple years, and then self-implementation. So as you're like starting to dip your toe into this vast ocean of knowledge and possibility, just go back to the root of how do I feel, right? And Danny, you
Right.
touched on that, like with the five senses. So it's like everything you're saying is now being connected to the other. When you break it down with like the scientific backing of it, that's beautiful so that we can have the woo woo people and the science people. But at the end of the day,
Right.
take that walk at sunset, go back home, read a paragraph, absorb it, and there you go. It's your evening routine, and it's just going to build your work. I love the way you explain things. I'm taking massive amounts of notes, and I hope everybody else is too. I really am. Like, that's why I
Oh.
was just so happy to have you on. I didn't want to do a ton of research because I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to get it straight from you and your words. Like, this is absolutely magical. That being said, when you take on a new client and you have all
Hmm.
these modalities to help them work through whatever they're trying to work through, or they might not even know. They just know, I want to be more. I want to experience more. How do you kind of navigate where you're going to like take somebody? Is it Reiki? Is it breath? Is it neurolinguistic? Is it like, how do you decide? And I'm sure eventually you bring in all your modalities to help and to help these people, but just
Hmm.
curious.
Yeah, I mean, through all the modalities that I've, practiced over time, I've created my own coaching, kind of like guideline in my own coaching book, right? And it's kind of my own programming for coaching in general. And it really starts with, like when you say what's more, like when you say I want more, what is more to you, right? Is more emotional,
Yeah.
right? Is more financial, right? Is more physical, right? Is it more spiritual, right? What type of relationships, connections, feelings do you want to have in your life? And you really start breaking it down from there, right? And one of the questions that you can always ask yourself is never ask yourself why, but ask yourself what specifically about that thing. And using the phrase what specifically is always really good because it allows you to be
Um,
more narrow focused on like what you're really looking for and what you're desiring. Why sometimes can be a very broad open question. So I think it's just starting very fundamentally, right? And I always like to touch on what are the primary emotions you're trying to feel on a daily basis, right? What are your values? What's your perma, right? And understanding what those things are that's the foundation, right? Those are the building blocks. Those are the basic level of things that you want to achieve on a daily basis. Because when you're emitting, the higher level frequencies of these good feelings, these good emotions, right? Then your body's able to function on a better on a daily basis. Neurologically, physiologically, everything else. So it's about feeling good. It's about, trying to feel your absolute best. And feeling good and feeling your absolute best is so different for every single person. So I think it's like to just answer your question, it's just circling back to what are the fundamentals of what you're trying to feel on a daily basis and then building it from there and understanding, what things make you feel good on a daily basis, focusing on those five triggers. I think for people that are learning to want to just start feeling good on a daily basis is find focus on your five senses, find out of those five senses five things that feel good to you, right? And include those into your morning routine, right? And allow those things to kind of start you in the right direction rather than allowing anything outside of yourself to pull you into whatever it wants to tell you.
I know Danny only has like 15 minutes left, so just wanted to get to a few different things. One thing I wanted to
Sure.
mention, like when you were talking about like consciousness and like neuro linguistic programming and everything else, one of the things that Paramahasa Yogananda, who's kind of been like a guru in my life, even though, I've never met
Hmm.
him. He's been, dead for 100 years. One of the things that he said in his book, Autobiography of a Yogi, was that he said, yoga is the science of spirituality, right? So I
Hmm.
think it's like a really important thing to remember that like, even all of these practices that we're like incorporating in our life, Chris was like, the woo woo and the science and stuff like that. There's just because we can't always explain it, with our current language and understanding doesn't mean that there's
Hmm.
not science behind it, So like
Right.
100 years ago, yoga existed, but now we're starting to realize, like Dr. Joe Dispenza is a big influence
Hmm.
with you, myself included. So like a lot of these things now that modern medicine is figuring out, it really has its roots. The yogis have been talking about this for hundreds of years at the very least. How was it that you came to Dr. Joe, and like what are some of the really important tenets that he kind of like brought to the forefront of like your understanding that you really went
Yeah.
like really influenced you in your thinking right now?
I would definitely say that going back to the reason why I was so tuned in and felt so called to, learning from Dr. Joe Dispenza is because of the type of clientele that I was working with, right? When you're working with, type A personality individuals, right? A lot of them have more skepticisms, right? Or limiting beliefs behind, the spiritual woo-woo stuff, right? And there's no real factual stuff to back that up behind a lot of Eastern healing practices and arts, right? So I thought what Joe Dispenza did a great job of is, kind of really combining science, right, with spirituality, and saying, hey, there's real science to back up all this stuff. And I think what my goal and my mission has been is to like just bring awareness behind the fact that like all this woo woo spiritual stuff that maybe people kind of feel not, they don't think like it is real, or they don't feel comfortable with, or is a little intimidating to them just because there's no facts behind it. It bridges that gap, right? And so for me, Dr. Joe does a great job of just bridging that gap and being like, no, there's real science behind all these different practices, right? It really affects you physiologically. How you think and how you feel and how you talk to yourself affects your physical body on a daily basis, right? I mean, it's pretty clear that if you're in a high stress level, that you're going to produce cortisol, and cortisol is going to, affect your body, right? And that's based on your thoughts. That's based on the information outside of yourself, right? He's really big into the idea that your body's a pharmacy, right? That, your body is able to produce a lot of the neurochemicals and, substances on its own, and that you don't need outside influences like pharmaceutical drugs to produce those things. He's really big on the placebo effect that, you have case studies where people take a certain drug for a certain amount of time, the other people get a sugar pill, whether it's an antidepressant, right, or anti-anxiety, medication, the same people take it, right? And the body produces the same chemicals without actually taking the real medication, right? So for me, Dr. Joe Dispenza's basic laws are just like how you think and how you feel, determines your state of being, right? And it not only affects your thoughts, but it affects your physical body, right? And when you can actually, own up to the facts and have accountability to the fact that how you think and how you feel really determines your physical wellness, right? Then you can start to be in actual control, right, of your life, and not play a victim role in your life of like I'm not in control of these things. How my body is and how I feel is just based on what's happening to me. I have no control of that. And for me, like I want to bring people into the space of power, right, in this place of control of like, no, you do have the power, you do have the capabilities, right, to completely change yourself physically, mentally. And when you start accessing these subconscious states, right, you start sending out frequencies right into the you want to call it the quantum field, fifth dimension, where time and space isn't really relevant. So you can start bringing healing into your life much faster than you typically would make even sense, right, on the third dimensional plane.
What is the quantum field in the fifth dimension?
Yeah, so we have the third dimensional plane, which is what we call Earth, right? Where time actually is, relevant to space, right? Time works on a linear plane, right? And then we have the fourth dimension is where actually just a small little gap where actually is time. Then what we have the fifth dimension is the quantum field, right? Where time and space are irrelevant, right? So things can happen, right?
Is that the astral plane?
The astral plane, right? Yeah, there's a lot of different, things for it, right? Where, the physical senses, right? The things that ground you to the physical third dimensional plane, the earth, your five senses do not exist anymore. You like to think of it as the fifth dimensional quantum field is like pure awareness, pure consciousness, right? Where, if you have out of body experiences, right, that is typically in the fifth dimensional plane, where you become the observer to you in this third dimensional plane.
So that seems like something we're accessing with breath work, right? Like one of the things that it's happened to me like really two or three times that I can, that are most notable. I've had these psychedelic experiences with breath work, visuals, out of body experiences. Like, can you expand on that? Like, how common is that? And like, is that what we're doing? We're accessing the quantum field through those psychedelic breathwork experiences?
Yeah, I think the first step to it in actually allowing it to happen is believing that it can. you have to have the mindset and the belief system that it can happen for you. Otherwise, you're not going to be as open to it, allowing and receiving it as you normally would. But those type of out-of-body experiences typically happen a lot with breath work, is because you go from that beta wave state, the conscious state, and you can drop yourself down into these subconscious states. And the subconscious state is where now you're able to, be more connected with your inner awareness, right? Your inner self, your, divine intuition, right? And there's different types of breathwork practices. One of them is a breathwork practice Joe Dispenza developed, where basically you're using like the internal pressure of your diaphragm to putting mechanical pressure on your spine, which it pushes the cerebral spinal fluid up your spine and puts mechanical pressure on your pituitary gland.
Wow.
And what that does is actually activate these crystals that are in your pituitary gland, which actually release the combination of melatonin, serotonin, which then can, if you convert melatonin, I think it's like a precursor to dimethyltryptamine. And so that's where you can have these out of body experiences, is through different types of breath work.
Is that like Kundalini energy? Is that like the scientific explanation of Kundalini energy?
Kind of, yeah. And it's all the Dr. Joe. He's the man. He's the one that, goes deep into that stuff. I highly recommend looking into that.
What are some different breathwork modalities that we can become familiar with that you would recommend somebody starting with? What are some of your favorites? If you just kind of want to, there's so many different kinds: holotropic breathing, Wim Hof method, Dr. Joe Dispenza's.
Yeah. I guess, depending on what there's so many, right? There really is so many, and like you look at pranayama, like that is, that's just the basic idea of yogic breath, of changing your breathing patterns. Breath work in itself is just to disrupt the typical unconscious breathing pattern that you have, which is typically thoracic breathing, and really focusing on taking your breath down into diaphragmatic breathing, right? Belly breathing, right? And to say, and a lot of breath work has been coined to helping with like stress. So it's taking you from that beta to that alpha theta wave state, which basically affects your vagus nerve, right? Which is connected to your diaphragm, which causes your body to go from an awake, fight or flight state to a parasympathetic rest and digest state. So there's like, somatic breathing. There's nostril alternate breathing, which you can do as well too, which is a great one. There's 4x4. There's box breathing, 4x4x4 breathing, which is pretty easy. I think that's a really, really good one for people that are just trying to calm themselves. It's very simple. It's taking a breath in for 4 counts, holding it at the top for 4 counts, releasing it at 4 counts, and at the bottom holding 4 counts, and then repeating that process. So it's a very simple called? Breathing. Box breathing or 4x4 breathing. Okay. It's a very simple one for people to do, but I love somatic breathing. Holotropic breath work is probably the other side of the coin with breath work, where you're really focusing on and getting yourself into a more awake state. And I think that is, a lot of the times is more of that euphoric awake state, rather than trying to calm yourself and put yourself into a deeper relaxed state. So I think if you're looking at, doing anything as far as trying to be awake, you have more of those euphoric highs with holotropic breathing. You're able to open up your diaphragm, right? And open up your thoracic, cavity to allow more breath and oxygen, so you can feel more awake, more energized with those type of breath works. But yeah, some of those are my favorite. I mean, a lot of them are very similar in different ways. But I think, some of my favorite, like I said, are going to be holotropic breath work, shamanic breath work, which a lot of times is involved with like music. I think it's 4x7x8 breathing, which is another great breath work, to help you induce sleep, hypnotic states. So I think if you're looking, into just breath work and trying to reduce stress levels, box breathing is very, very simple. It's easy to, count out. Looking up any YouTube videos on that stuff is very, very essential to this, getting started. And there's so many out there. And like I said, everyone's path and everyone's journey is so different. Find what works for you. And I think it's just exploring those type of things, and feel free to reach out to me. I'm always here to, help and guide
what's
anyone.
The best way where everybody can follow you? Obviously Instagram at Danny Kinnas, right? That's a good spot.
I would say, my Instagram is where I'm most active, and I do a lot of my videos. It's Danny, DANNY _Kinnas, KINAS. Shoot me a message, and I'd love to, answer any questions that you might have. And, if you ever want to dive deeper within anything else, always open to having those conversations as well.
With the few minutes that we have left, what is the thing about like when we breathe, everybody's breathing wrong most of the time throughout the day, right? We're like inhaling, our stomach's going in. That's like completely wrong. When we're taking deep breaths, you want to expand your stomach. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like sticking out your gut, I think that's the reason why a lot of people don't like to do belly breathing is because, they have this subconscious, thing around, their physical appearance, right? A lot of times. And so it's easier to do like stress breathing, and have the shorter breath, right? I think it's a subconscious thing that's been passed over time after time. And, so when you focus on, trying to relax your breathing, focus on expanding your stomach and contracting it back in and creating space on the lower part of your diaphragm. And your body's going to absorb more oxygen. Your body's going to feel more relaxed. It's something that you have to practice consciously so that once you do it enough consistently, that it becomes unconscious. Right. So it's something that you're not going to do, it's not going to you're not going to train yourself after doing it a couple of times.
Kind of like a metaphor for life.
Right. And it's going back to what Chris is saying. You got to do that work. That is work. That is the process that you have to put in. And, yeah, I mean, it's just, it's one of those things that you have to consciously focus on, right? And that's where the work comes in, is consciously focusing on these stuff and setting time aside to actually do them. And, you can, like Chris said, you can walk the walk, talk the talk, but at the end of the day, you know in your own heart whether or not you're putting in the time and energy to better yourself. And I think that is the ultimate accountability, and the body keeps score, right? And, and I think just taking the time to do these things is so profound. And when you create that, that habit, that unconscious, pattern of doing this over and over again, you're going to find profound changes in your life, one way, shape, or form. But again, like what Chris says, we're having this event at the end of August. You can follow her page, obviously my page, and we'll keep you up to date on that. But if anything, even if you're not interested in working out, just come, be present, and, just connect with us. We'd love to just have you there and just, speak with you guys. We want it to be just a very powerful event. If I had to give out one just, simple but significant piece of, commandment advice, right? Or what it would be is just, the relationship that you have with yourself is the most important relationship that you'll have your whole entire life. So, think about spending time with yourself. And I think that, you sitting down in a room by yourself, staring at four walls, nothing else, and, just observing where your mind goes really determines, the quality of your life. The things outside of your life, the things that you have, everything else really doesn't matter. But the most important thing in your life is the relationship you have with yourself. And, the quality of your life, in my opinion, is when you sit with yourself with nothing else, no distractions around you, right? How do you feel? And, if that is not where you want it to be, then, there's your work, right? And I think that is the number one thing where fundamentally everyone can start at. You don't need anything to sit by yourself and with four walls and nothing and no distractions around you. And I think building from that and, asking, and reaching out for support and resources, not feeling, uncomfortable to doing those things. People want to help. People understand, and, taking that time to just develop that relationship with yourself, I think is the most important thing you can do for yourself as a, individual that wants to grow.
Beautifully put. Amazing. You got to come back. Man.
Yeah,
we've got more to talk
so
about.
Many things we got to talk on. Yeah.
You gotta. We need a breathwork coach.
Don't worry.
Yeah,
we're going.
Okay,
we're going. We're taking a full send there for sure.
Part of the tribe. All right. Thanks so much, guys.